Welcome everyone to episode 4 of Ty's Training Talking with My Dad. This is the week of January 13th. I'm Tyler Andrews, and here as always with my co-host and father, Tim Andrews, aka Mr. C, for another look at life, training, the universe, and everything ahead of Project Himalaya. This has been a really, really good week for me. Super solid. Another 100 plus kilometers of running, 9,000 meters of vert, and about 19 hours of training time. And really, this was kind of where the real training started. I got back from Chile, and once I got back to Quito, I felt like in my mind that was where I was kind of going from, vacation mode to okay, now I'm really starting to train. Highlight of the week was definitely Saturday's benchmark workout on the Polichaski trail, which we've talked about, which is my kind of standard trail here. It's a vertical kilometer, and just showed that I'm way, way ahead of where I wanted to be and where I started the last block. So feeling super confident, strong, and stoked to talk about it all. How you doing, Mr. C?
I'm doing very well, thanks. Just trucking along and glad to be here.
Excellent. Okay. Well, let's dive into it. I know you've got a bunch of questions. So let's talk through the week.
Okay. So I thought we would start out, we'll see how often this happens, but you have some idiosyncratic terminology. I'll call it Tyler talk. And so when I read through your logs, every once in a while I just go, huh?
Yep.
And so I thought I would note those and bring them up because I figure if I don't know what they mean, probably other people don't either. So you mentioned the term Zoomies at one point. So what's a
I know what this
Zoomie?
is. Yeah, this was I can't remember what day it was. It was the day that we made a long drive back from the mountains to Santiago when we were still in Chile. And I almost always exercise in the morning. And when I don't, I get really cranky all day. And especially with like a 3-hour drive and like we got lost in all these tunnels coming into Santiago. I was just like really cranky and annoyed. And anyways, I don't know. People use it with their dogs and like toddlers as well, where they say like, oh, he just needed to get his zoomies out. And it's like sometimes you've got a bunch of energy inside and you just got to go let it all out. And that's how I feel sometimes, like a toddler or
Okay.
a dog. I just need to go run
Okay.
around and
I
exercise.
just need to go get some energy off,
Yeah, exactly.
burn off some stuff, whatever. Okay, got
Yep.
it. Zoomies, good one to know.
Yep.
I'll
It's zoomies. It's a good one.
store that one for my own use. Okay.
Definitely.
Nubbin was something you used. I think that was a geographic term.
Yeah, I use Nubbin just to refer to like a little bump, like a hill or something. So I think in this context, it was talking about somewhere up on Ruhu. There's like a little nubbin above, like kind of where the trail like plateaus for a minute and goes down. So that it just basically means little hill.
Okay. And then several times you use the term Ethio, I think, in cross
Yeah.
training.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah. Ethio is a stretching routine that I do that I picked up in when I went to Ethiopia, which was like, God, was that almost 10 years ago? I think it was 2015. And the runners there would do it literally every single session. And I picked it up and kind of made it part of my routine. So yeah, I do that almost every single day. It's just a dynamic stretching thing that I do at the end of runs.
Okay. So maybe someday you could put that in your log, exactly what that is, or we could talk about it. Hmm.
Yeah, maybe we'll make a little like bonus YouTube video or something and show people if they want to see exactly what that is. It's not long. It's like 5-10 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a couple of times in your notes, and this one too, you use the term car wash at some point in the Polichaski run. And originally, I thought it literally was a car wash, and I'm not sure. So
No, it's a forest.
I thought I would ask. Mhm.
This is actually a David Wilderism. David is one of my oldest friends from high school, and it's funny. There's so many things in my vernacular that I associate with him or that he came up with, and this is one of them. I took him on that trail, and it's basically a very narrow part of the trail where there's grass and plants and little sharp bushes on both sides. And especially in the morning, it's wet and it's like going through a car wash. So David
Going
coined
through a
it the
car
car
wash.
wash.
Got it.
That's the car wash.
Okay.
It's the crux. It's the hardest, slowest section of the route. It can
And
be
it feels
really
a little bit
annoying
like a car wash.
if it's cold and it's wet, it feels terrible.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yep.
Thank you. So that's
Yeah,
the
of course.
Tyler talk for the week.
Good
Okay.
stuff. I like
So,
it.
so this was an interesting week because you spent part of the week in Santiago,
Yep.
and you went on this big climb up the Volcan San Jose, and that sounded like a big effort. It was long and longer than you thought. So how do you handle that, and how do you handle, in particular, recovery? Because I know, again, even just as a layperson following you in the sport a tiny bit, recovery is a critical part of the effort. It's not only how do you run, but how do you recover. So how do you handle recovery from these big efforts?
Recovery, I will give a shout out to a book called Good to Go by Christine Ashwanden. It's a great read. And the TLDR of that book is basically there's a ton of different recovery modalities that people use. And pretty much the only one that has really strong scientific evidence is sleep. And so that's a huge focus for me is making sure I get adequate sleep, especially after a really big effort like we had last weekend. And then it's really up to the individual. A lot of it is hard to prove. We talked a little bit about this last time, or hard to study in just literally creating studies and that are effective in cohorts that are big enough. So recovery science is really still kind of out there, I think, in terms of there's not that many things that have proof, and a lot of it is placebo effect. It's like if it feels good to you and it feels like it helps and you believe it helps, it's probably helping. So that's kind of how I look at it. I mean, number one, I focus on sleep. I focus on nutrition, especially after really big efforts. And then the other things that I try to do are I really, really like hot, cold contrast baths. So that was actually something that we did the day after we came down from San Jose. We were out in the middle of the Andes and went to these really beautiful natural hot springs that were super, super hot. And then they have really cold like glacial water. So it's like volcanic, naturally heated spring water and cold glacial water. And for me personally, again, I don't know that there's a ton of science that would support it, but for me, my legs always just feel better when I do that contrast bath stuff. So that's a big thing that I do. But honestly, mostly it's about getting adequate sleep, and then it's about making sure that the rest of the week, or the next few days at least, are really scaled to support the recovery from that big effort. So you're not going out and doing something really hard the next day.
Okay. I'll note that the Dr. Andy Galpin that you're working with is an expert in recovery. So I've listened to a few of his podcasts, and he talks about sleep. He also talks about breathing a
Hmm.
lot right afterwards and resting. But yeah, interesting. He does a lot of science on it, so you might want to look him up.
For
Um,
sure. Okay.
Okay, so while you were in Santiago at sea level, you did some workouts there. So, how do you make the calculations and adjust your workouts to do workouts in a place like Santiago that's close to sea level as compared to your normal environment in Quito, which is, 10,000 feet almost?
Yeah, the short answer is I just don't work out at sea level that much. So it's not that big a deal. I don't really stress out about it too much. If I do, it's honestly a lot of it is just by feel. Like I know what it feels like at this point to run at various efforts. And even if I'm doing a harder workout, we could really go off the rails here because there's a fascinating thing about how heart rate adjusts at altitude. And so I've kind of figured out over the years, okay, if I'm, at your house in Massachusetts, or if I'm in Santiago, I actually have to adjust up my heart rate a little bit because your heart can beat faster at sea level than it can at altitude. But in general, it's a lot of it is just by effort. This particular trip, because it was so early season, I wasn't really worried about it. It was more like, okay, I'm in a random hotel in a random gym it was incredibly hot in the gym. So, and whatever, I'm just going to kind of get in a good solid effort for an hour. It doesn't really matter that much. I don't know how accurate these machines are. So I don't stress too much about it. Now, if I were a runner and, thinking about converting, well, if I were a runner, I still think of myself as a runner, but if I were training for a marathon or a 5K, then suddenly that's a huge factor. And you think about that all the time because you have, the pace conversions, literally they have tables where you can say, okay, if I'm running 5-minute mile pace up here in Quito, what does that, convert to at sea level? And then you can look at pace and you can look at heart rate and all these things. But for me, for right now, with what I'm doing, especially this early in the season, it's mostly just, does the effort feel right? And is the heart rate more or less in the right zone?
Okay. So perceived effort is a big deal. Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is
Perceived
interesting
effort.
because again, in my sort of, layman's efforts at nutrition and getting cardio training, a lot of the people that at least I listen to and respect a lot say actually perceived effort is the best way, short
Yep.
of being in a very controlled lab environment of telling if you're in zone two, for instance, um,
Yep.
rather than looking at your heart rate because heart rates are highly variable for across
Yep.
people. Hmm.
Yeah, and
Yep. Okay.
heart rate's a really noisy variable, and like you have to have gear that's actually measuring it, right? Like your Apple Watch is
Right.
probably not measuring it as well as like a, electro heart rate monitor that you'd wear on your
Right.
chest. And
Hmm.
and the thing with perceived effort is you I think if you have a background with exercise, you get to learn those things pretty quickly. I think for people who are more beginners, sometimes that's where heart rate stuff can actually be more helpful, or pace-based training, because you might, if you've never run before, literally, and you're doing like a couch to 5K kind of thing, you might really not know what those various perceived efforts are. Like even the idea of, can I have a conversation? Can I, get a word out here and there? Those can be those can be really hard to determine if you're a super beginner. So with really beginner runners, I would always recommend, talking to someone who can maybe like go with you and kind of give you a sense of that, but also some objective data, whether it's heart rate or pace. Those things are helpful as well.
Yeah, maybe. The interesting counterpoint to that is one of the reasons that perceived exertion is suggested is because it's integrative of all these other factors. Like if you had a bad
Mm.
night's sleep, then
Yep.
your perceived effort will uh, peak at a lower you'll peak at a lower heart rate, for example.
Yep.
So, but anyway, we don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. But interesting. So,
Yeah.
particularly for people, yes, as you say, like you, who have very fine discrimination over their effort levels, perceived effort is really important, is what you're saying in terms of how you manage your big days and your recovery days.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, good to know. So pay attention to those who are in the audience getting better at your perceived effort so you get better and better at telling how you're doing so you can manage your recoveries.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think if you do heart rate training and you're also paying attention to your perceived effort, and you do this for a long time, you kind of know when you're getting good at it, because you'll be able to tell your heart rate without even looking at it. And I can tell
Yep.
you my heart rate within a few beats a lot of the time when I'm exercising, just by how hard I'm breathing, how much I'm sweating, all those things, just by how I
Yep.
feel.
Yep. Okay. So you got back Thursday
Yep.
after sounds like a pretty grueling trip um, overnight, and then you sort of said, okay, I'm going out running because if I don't go out now, I'm going to feel sorry for myself or something like that later.
Yeah. I
I have
mean,
to give this where I give you a lot of credit. You are, that's very good self-discipline to do that after such a rough travel day. Um, so how do you make that happen in the flesh when you're really in that moment? How do you say, okay, I've got to get out the door right now?
I just start doing it. I just go. I just don't think about it. I was just having this conversation with a guy I coached, this guy Douglas, who's he's a fantastic guy. And we were talking about this idea of motivation and getting out the door. And he lives in the Northeast, and it's winter and it's cold there. And we were talking about these little kind of tricks that you can do, like literally just the act of putting on your clothes, like your exercise clothes, tying your shoes
Yeah.
up, like things that you can control that aren't that hard. And then all of a sudden, it's like you've got your clothes on, you got your shoes on. It would be really silly not to go outside, And then
Yeah.
once you're outside, you're
Yeah.
outside. And then, I talk a lot with my athletes and myself about the like 1 mile rule, or you could say like the 10-minute rule, which is, no matter how bad you're feeling, just go out and jog for 5 or 10 minutes. And worst case scenario, if it's really just not meant to be, you're only 5 or 10 minutes away from your house, and walk back with your tail between your legs. And I've done that a couple times, but most of the time after those 5 or 10 minutes, you're gonna feel good, and then you're gonna do the whole run,
Yep.
and then at the end you're gonna be like, wow, that was great. I'm so glad I did that, which is exactly how I felt this day. Regardless of how long the travel was, I always feel better after exercise. And so I know myself very well, and I know that I can project myself into the future a little bit and be like, okay, if 6 hours from now I got out the door, went for a run in the park and it's beautiful and I sweat and I get my heart rate up and then I come back and I have a good meal and then I go to bed, I'm going to feel a lot better about myself in the day than I'm going to feel if I sit on the couch and feel sorry for myself and don't do anything because I'm cranky and tired from traveling. Like I prefer that outcome. I prefer the going running outcome. So even if I'm
Yeah.
tired and I don't really want to do it in that moment, it's, sometimes I talk about like, oh, future Tyler and current Tyler. And it's like, I'm doing future Tyler a favor. Like current Tyler is kind of annoyed, but like future Tyler is going to be really grateful that I put my clothes on and got out the door.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And there's so many great things about that I certainly feel that way too. I think all of us do, maybe, but I certainly feel that way. Like, oh, I really don't want to get on the exercise elliptical or whatever right now, but I know if I can just get started, I'll be fine.
Yep.
Um, it's just that getting started part that's hard. And what you talked about, well, just go 5 minutes and the worst happens is you don't go any further. That's classic behavioral economics. Okay. So,
Sure.
so shout out to behavioral economics. Why are humans crazy? It's a little kind of anthropological study area and worth looking into. But I remember listening to a lecture by an expert, and he said, I hate going to the gym. And he's trying to overcome the same problem, right? How do I get myself into the gym? So I said,
Mhm.
okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go to the gym. That's it. All I have to do is go to the gym. Don't have to do
Yeah,
anything.
exactly. Exactly. Yep. But then it'd be
And
really silly to go to the gym and just stand there. Like you might as well
yeah,
do
but
something
most of
or
the time he
go
says,
home.
if you go to the gym, sometimes he says, I go to the gym and I turn around and I go home. But most of the time, once
He
you're
does.
at the gym, yeah, he said occasionally he still does, but he says, once you're at the gym, what you've done is relieve the pressure. Because for most people, there's some sort of fear and pressure, and that's what behavioral economics, why we
Mhm.
behave irrationally, even though we know it's irrational, we still have this fear. What's the fear of a workout? Well, it really shouldn't be any. But we
Yep.
still have this fear of like, you know, something deep inside me doesn't want to do this workout.
Yep.
Um, the other thing is a very classic strategy for avoiding procrastination, life in general. So, in giving back to the community in a broader sense, projecting future Tyler, future Tim,
Mm.
future yourself is very powerful.
Yep.
So, when you don't want to do something, whatever it is, okay, whether it's work or workout or whatever, if you could say, hey, I'm doing future myself a favor, and you can look back from that future self and say, yep, I'm going to feel a lot better after I've finished this workout or piece of work or whatever chore that I'm not really excited about doing. That's
Hmm.
a very powerful psychological mechanism. You've said this before too. I trick myself into doing things to a certain extent.
Totally.
You can say, well, I'm tricking myself into doing something, but you're really not. You're just realizing that there's a trade-off and the trade-off is positive, but it's hard for you to see the positive trade-off right in that moment. Um,
Yeah.
and I know that's one of the things I try and do is, tell myself that all the time when I don't feel like doing any kind of exercise. Oh, I'm going to feel a lot better after I know I'm going to feel better. I always feel better after I exercise.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's delayed gratification at the end of the day is what it is. And
Yeah.
that's like my whole life is delayed gratification.
Well, as is most of life, and it's one of the things we call maturity in the grand sense, is understanding that most of life is what we were talking about yet the in the last conversation about the difference between instant response, instant gratification, which sports is almost designed to do, right? Is
Mhm.
if you play better, you win and you win right away.
Mhm.
But even in sports, there's delayed gratification because to play better, you have to practice a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, if you really want to be better, and you don't see that until you perform, but you see it pretty quickly, much quicker than in a lot of things. Like if you want to get a college degree, it takes 4 years. There's a lot of delayed
Yeah.
gratification and a lot of work. And then even the college degree doesn't necessarily change your life instantaneously. So it's a long process from what you learn to what you receive and how you perform. So yeah, it's good. That's why athletics has lots of good lessons in it. Okay,
Sure does.
on with the program. So you mentioned that you ran the Polichaski on Saturday, and that's
Yeah.
a benchmark run for you because you've done it. So you know sort of how to calibrate yourself when you do that run. And so and we're very happy, stoked, I think is the word you like to use,
A lot of
um,
stoke.
because you were way ahead of where you thought you would be earlier in your training process. So tell me a little bit more about what that felt like, what the workout felt like, and what does that really mean to you in terms of the overall build-up for Project Himalaya?
Yeah, without going into too much of the weeds, because again, I want to kind of leave the more technical stuff for the written side because I think it does better there. So the workout itself was 5 minute repetitions up the climb. So basically you run 5 minutes, you stop and rest for 1 minute, like wherever you finish, and then you keep going for another 5 minutes and then you rinse and repeat. So, your total time without the rest is basically is the time that it takes you to run up the hill, right? Because for the rest, you're just standing around in place. And I had done this exact workout on this exact trail at the beginning of my block last year, about I think it was about 90 days before Manaslu. So first of all, I'm a little bit earlier in the calendar. I think we're more like 100 to 120 days before our big May project for Project Himalaya. And my time for that climb, for the work part, for the running part, I think last year was 57 minutes. And so I thought, okay, if I can basically be right there, if I can be at 57 minutes and I'm 2 or 3 weeks ahead on the calendar, or 2 or 3 weeks earlier on the calendar, that'll be great. And then what I found was I think I ran 51 something. So I was 6 minutes ahead, which again might not sound like a lot, but it's more than 10%. That's really significant difference for me. I know exactly what like every minute on that trail means. So to be 10% of where I was at the beginning of the last build up and have an extra month, it shows me fitness wise, I'm way farther ahead because I remember that workout. It wasn't easy. And it wasn't easy this week either. But the difference is I feel like I have way more time now because I'm starting much farther along in terms of my fitness and I'm starting from a higher place. So what it does is it reduces a lot of the pressure that I feel. Because again, if we go back to our list of 16 things from, that first or second episode, one of the big things was, okay, I don't need to get fitter than I did in the last build up. I don't need to be fitter than I was for Monopoly. That's totally appropriate, is to have basically a similar build up. And now what I'm seeing is, okay, I'm already fitter than I was. So I have time to, again, going back to that list, I could be less greedy. I can be more conservative. I can focus on recovery, on staying healthy, on all these things. And to me, that's huge because it means I don't have, like, if I'm on the fence about, oh, should I do this extra workout or maybe not, I can cut something out of the log. Or even if like, oh, I rolled my ankle or something and I have to take a week off, suddenly that is really not that big of a deal because I'm so much farther ahead. So I feel like it just it puts me on a much better starting point, and it gives me a lot more flexibility as I look at the next like 3.5 months, and that is super super exciting.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Um, Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, that was definitely the high point of the week for me, of just I kind of put that on the calendar a week or two ago because we talked about those first couple of workouts. I'm like, okay, I feel like these are going really well. And I really wanted to okay, I'm going to do something that is super concrete and comparable. It's like literally the exact same workout on the exact same trail. It's apples to apples. And that it like, yeah, couldn't have gone better. So I feel super confident now. And I think it's mostly just a matter of staying calm, enjoying the process and working hard, but knowing that, I've got a lot more in the bank now than I expected to.
Great. Okay. So the other thing I notice is if I don't pay attention and read these logs as I've now been doing, I just sort of think, run, eat, sleep, run, eat, sleep. And but when you read the logs, you realize, wow, it's actually quite a bit more complicated than that. There's all these different types of workouts. There's cross training stuff. Uh, it's just much more complicated, and you're constantly kind of, it seems like, making decisions. I think we talked in the first episode maybe about how you do a lot of planning, but not
Mhm.
down to the super micro level like day to day. And it seems like you're making a lot of decisions about day to day, what you're doing and how to go about your training. So can you tell me how that works? How do you think through that? How do you make these decisions at the kind of micro level about adjusting the various workouts?
Yeah, from a day-to-day basis, there is a lot of adjustment that still happens literally during the day. So sometimes I wake up and I have a very specific plan. I know exactly what I'm going to do that day. Those are usually the harder, the more structured days. But even those days, there will always be a range. I'll always write in, you know, 12 to 14 reps or something, you know? So there will always be some wiggle room because I want to give myself that ability to not just stick to what's on paper just because it's on paper. And I think that is a trap that you can fall into of, oh, my coach wrote it for me or I wrote it for myself and therefore I have to do it. And sometimes, again, going back to our don't get greedy theme, I can't remember who said this. There was someone that I think it was on Let's Run. They had a quote from a famous coach right now, a running coach. I can't remember who it was, but he was basically saying, a lot of runners, especially young runners, college runners, they will like race the last rep. They'll run like all out, or they'll even do like one extra than the coach says. And like, there's all these quotes about Michael Jordan. He'll be like, yeah, the guy in the gym told me to do 10 reps and so I did 12 or something. And I think endurance sport, especially with really motivated people, it's often the opposite. It's often doing the one extra rep or even doing the last rep sometimes is too much, especially if you're really pushing too hard. Like sometimes it's better to do one fewer. Like you want to finish the workout feeling like, I could have done 10% more. I could have done one or two more of those, which is very different from other sports where, well, maybe it's not, I don't know, but it's certainly different than the kind of machismo stuff that you hear from, like NBA players where it's like, oh yeah, or like UFC fighters where it's all about, oh, I'm gonna finish like throwing up in the trash can or whatever. And I think with running an endurance sport, the secret is leaving that, waiting for like that feeling of going to the well and digging all the way down. You save that for the days that really matter, which are usually your competition days. They're not, the every day workout or even every week workout. And I've had a lot of trouble with that over the years. And I think it's literally going back to the question we were just talking about with, starting at a higher fitness level than I expected. It gives me that opportunity to be able to say, you know what? No, I don't need to push today. I'm already pretty fit. Like if I can do 80% of the workout, that's fantastic. Like, and I can feel like I can do more. That's great because what that means is I'll be able to recover better. I can go, do another solid session in a couple days, and then I can just keep stacking up those bricks. And we talk about consistency so much in endurance sport that it's much more important to be consistent and have these kind of like, I remember talking about this with Jim Walmsley when he and I were training together, that like it's better to have 3 or 4 months of B minus workouts, but every week you're hitting 2 or 3 B minus workouts versus like you hit an A plus and then you have a C minus and then you have an A workout and then you have a B and then, you're kind of all over the map. And so for me, and I try to impart this on the athletes I coach as well, that, consistency is so important. And that's really what I'm trying to focus on here. So going back to your question about the decision-making process, it is this balance because you don't want to just bail when it gets hard because it's important to do hard stuff, right? But this is where just experience comes in and knowing your body. It's really important to know when is it appropriate hard and when is it like, oh man, I feel like I'm digging into that well that I'm not supposed to tap in workouts. And that's where it's like, okay, I'm going to stop. And so for me, the decision making criteria, especially on hard days, is usually okay, do I feel like this is the absolute max? Do I feel like I'm not sure I could even finish this rep, let alone do another one? Because right now, early in the season, I always want to be finishing feeling like I left something on the table. Like there's another 10% there.
Cool. That's very helpful. Yeah, really interesting too.
Yeah.
And again, just shows how much you can tell how you're doing, how close you are aligned with what your body's feeling.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I read about your fasting, and you've talked about how you fast a lot of times. You've mentioned it a few times at least, and I'd never paid attention to this before because it's kind of it was surprising to me because, gosh, you're running like crazy in these long distances and you're fasting. It seems like, first of all, why don't you just fall over? Because you don't have any energy. Second of all, why is that just part of, what makes you fast and is it just random part of things or is it intentional? And third, what happened on Sunday and what did you learn?
Yeah, so the big caveat here is that fasted training is not generally something that I recommend to most people. This is the kind of like do as I say, not as I do thing, to quote my old shop teacher Fitz. I think most and also there is a significant difference on how fasting affects female versus male athletes. So this is something that just big like disclaimer caveat at the beginning that you should talk to with your coach or nutritionist before you take anything that I say and try and apply it to yourself. And please just don't do that in general. But if you're curious, I would talk to someone who has more letters after their name than I do. Hopefully, someone who knows more about nutrition. Now that said, the reason that I do some fasted training, and for what it's worth, it's usually only my like easier days. So I would never fast before like a harder run. So one of those structured days, I'm always having a meal in the morning. But there is some evidence that shows that doing fasted training, so easy, like we're talking zone one, zone two training, without ingesting anything, basically helps stimulate your fat metabolism. And so for us as long distance athletes, very long distance athletes, ultra athletes, that's really important because obviously we're taking in gels, candy bars, chapati egg sandwiches, whatever we can get. Like we're taking in a lot of calories while we eat, but
Oreos.
your Oreos, definitely. Where's my Nabisco sponsorship at, please? Nabisco, hit me up. But actually, you cannot take in enough calories to make up for the deficit of what you're burning over an effort that's 10, 15, 24 plus hours. You just can't do it. Your body cannot take on enough calories to do that. So what happens is supplements by metabolizing the fat that's already in your body because you can store carbohydrate in your body as you, Mr. C, know very well as a type 1 diabetic. We talk about blood sugar and carbohydrate and all that stuff all the time. But your stored carbohydrate, your glycogen, generally the accepted rule is that lasts you at most about an hour and a half to 2 hours, which is why you see, the marathon. People talk about the wall, hitting the wall. It's usually around that 2 hour mark because it's when you start running out of stored carbohydrate. And so that's when all of a sudden your body switches from mostly burning carbohydrate to, oh my gosh, we're out of carbohydrate. We just have to start metabolizing fat. If you're not used to that, it's a much less efficient process. I'm not a physiologist. I'm not a biologist. I can't go into too much detail on why that is, but it's something that can be trained in the same way that other types of metabolism can as well. And so that's the idea with the fasted training is essentially making your body more efficient at movement while metabolizing fat at a relatively low heart rate. And to answer your question, yeah, Sunday, I think was, I don't know, 4.5 or 5 hours or something. I did this bigger loop up on Ruku, and usually my mornings are like 2 to 3 hours, and the difference between 2 to 3 and 4 to 5 I found was really significant. I started to get really cranky at the end, and that's when I can tell I'm like getting a little bit wobbly and bonky. Is mostly just like I'm like, this needs to be over right now. Like just like catching my toes on like every rock and stuff. So yeah, I that was for me a lesson of just okay, there's the kind of like normal, easy 2-ish hours. Okay, that's no problem. But the longer stuff need to start carrying some gels.
Yep. Okay. Well, as somebody who does know a little bit about biology, but doesn't have PhD after my name, so caveat emptor, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Ultra athletes, well, people in general, the better you are at burning fat, the generally the healthier you are, period. That's a broad, oversimplified statement, but that's one of the reasons exercise is, as they say, such good medicine. The hugely oversimplified way to think about it is mitochondria. So,
Hmm.
mitochondria are the little powerhouses, particularly in your muscles,
Yep.
and that turn basically sugar into energy and fat. Ultimately, ultimately you have to have sugar. But if you run out of direct sugar, what you call your glycogen stores, then the next process is you start to break down fat. But it's a little more complicated because it isn't pure sugar. You have to break down the fat and eventually turn it into sugar. And then
Mm.
you can use the sugar to power your muscles. And what you want to do is have, therefore, as much mitochondria as possible. The more
Yep.
mitochondria, and they can be healthier or less healthy. So there's a whole lot of nuance to it, but at a broad stroke level, the reason ultra athletes are so incredibly capable of running such long ways is because they have, to put it in your terms, a shit ton of mitochondria, and that
Yep.
enables them to use these fat stores much more efficiently. So what you're saying is you have there's some evidence that uh, you can make that process even more effective and generate even more mitochondria potentially, or whatever it is beyond that, by running
Yeah.
fasted in these slower workouts. But it only goes so far, and at the end
Yeah.
of that, you're still in need of energy.
No, for
Mhm.
sure. Yep.
Okay, got it. Interesting.
Yep.
Okay, so now, so let's talk about your setup. So you're starting to get into Tyler the Monk,
Yeah.
and so
Thank goodness.
you, you've got you've got your own apartment now in Quito. You've got a treadmill in the building. You've got all these trails right out your door. So how is this setup helping?
I think that we talked about routine last time and the idea of kind of simplifying things, this it's funny when you were saying kind of like run, eat, sleep, repeat. There is a lot of that. There's also a lot of this. Yeah, it ends up taking up a lot of time somehow. Like especially the sleeping. And like I'm a maybe that's one of my superpowers is that I can lie down for like 10 or 12 hours sometimes, and like if that's what my body needs, I'm just out. I'm a pretty good sleeper, but it does leave you know, not the most hours in the day sometimes. And literally, you know, if I'm training 20 to 30 hours a week, that doesn't sound like that much. But when you add up, okay, I'm driving to the Polichaski almost every day. Then you're going to the gym, you're doing this, like the PT's coming, cross training, stretching, all these other things. Like the days like get eaten up pretty quick. And so I think having a setup where as much as possible of that is local is super convenient makes my life so much easier because I am still coaching. I'm still, I'm trying to have something of a social life, at least just like talking to friends and family and stuff like that. And, I go grocery shopping and do normal person things too. So there's this, this balance of, okay, I want to give my athletics its space and my training as much space and respect as it needs, while also recognizing that sometimes it's just really, really convenient. I have a stationary bike set up now on my little porch here. So I can literally just walk 12 feet and I'm on the stationary bike instead of I don't have to go down to the gym, like, or go out to an actual gym down the street, like where I do my real lifting and stuff like that. So little things like that that can save half an hour a day, like to me, that means a lot and it adds up. And it mostly means it's an extra half hour that I have to rest and recover. So a lot of it is just it's time management stuff at the end of the day, which is like what my mother has like instilled in me from a very young age of is something that is really important for me to like deal with my overall life stress and anxiety is just having a better sense of time and not feeling overcommitted or rushed from thing to thing. And yeah, I think my setup here is pretty much perfect for that. I feel really comfortable. I feel at home. And I think that's the other really big side of it is just having a space that feels like home. Like I have really spent a lot of the last 4 months basically living in other people's spaces, whether those are hotels or tents or, tea houses, whatever it is. And having a place where like literally today I just went and like printed out a bunch of like family photos and like big pictures of mountains that I've taken. And I'm going to like hang them on the wall and decorate them. Like I got some
Oh,
succulents.
nice.
So like things like that, just like little things to make it feel a little bit more
Yeah,
like home. And that's really nice.
that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially, you know, any professional athlete, I would assume, has similar kinds of, it's just tunnel vision, laser focus, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, being a tennis and a golf aficionado, you follow those folks who make a lot of money. They are ridiculously insulated and they have helpers and entourages that do all sorts of stuff just to make them able to say incredibly laser focused.
Yep.
So you're doing what you can, given that you're not getting the kind of compensation that those
Not
folks get.
yet. Not
Um,
with that attitude. We'll see. That's why we're
we'll
launching our
see.
podcast empire.
That's right. Okay.
LeBron James check is coming tomorrow.
So you mentioned you've talked a lot about not getting greedy. It's the number one thing on your list of 16 items. How do you hold yourself accountable to that and make sure you really follow that one in particular, since you've mentioned that as the most important one?
I think anytime I'm kind of on the fence about something, I try to reframe it as it is this putting too much on my plate? Is this getting greedy? And that could be overall life plate, it could be training plate, it could be literally in one specific workout, like should I do 14 reps or 12? Um, and it's okay, is this coming from a place of this feels appropriate, or is it coming from a place of I am trying to prove something to myself, especially on the exercise front? There's this great quote from this guy, Jacob Ingebrigtsen, who's like the phenom of the 1500 meters right now on the track. And he was talking about how a lot of runners and athletes in general, I would guess, this goes back a little bit to what we were talking about before, a lot of runners test themselves. So they will, go out and try and prove to themselves in a workout that they're capable of doing something. So they'll go run really, really hard in the workout to say, oh, look, I can do this in the workout and now I'll be able to do this in the race. And his analogy is like you're digging up your carrots before they're ready to like look at the carrot and see if it's there. And then you like try to put it back in the ground. Then maybe that doesn't work out so well, And
Uh-huh.
so I think about that a lot. I'm like, okay, am I digging up my carrots too early? Because I want to leave the carrots there for race day. And
Yeah.
and so that's something I've been thinking about a lot this block, and it's even more so after the workout on Saturday, where again I know that I'm starting in a great place. So I don't have anything to prove to myself right now. I think I've written out enough of a program that I'm very comfortable that if I can just hit these kind of key indicators that I'm super confident that I'll be ready. And so I don't have anything to prove to myself on a day-to-day basis in any one workout. I think endurance sport is your fitness is the sum of all of the work that you've done. There's no one workout that says, "Oh, you're really good," or "Oh, you suck" all of a sudden. And
Yeah.
as with my coach hat on, I see this all the time where people will have a bad workout and they say, "I lost all my fitness." No, you had a bad day. You're probably sick or didn't sleep well. It's fine.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. Oh my gosh, I had this one incredible workout, and then sometimes the race doesn't go well. And really, what you want to look at is what's the average. What have you done over the last 90 days or even 6 months? That's the important part. And so that's what I think about is in terms of getting greedy is I'm trying not to prove anything to myself on any one day. And I'm trying to take every decision in the context of, okay, is this decision helping set me up for what I want to do in May? Is this the best thing that I can do in this situation? And that's for everything. Like if someone asks me, if a friend asks me out to dinner and it's like at 10 p.m., I'm like, you know what? Probably not. I'm going to skip that. I'll go in the summer or something. Like you'll still be here. Um, but also it's like, hey, if it's something really special that sounds really cool and I'm gonna have a really positive experience and it's gonna be really fun and I'm gonna have a great memory and it's not gonna negatively impact my training, then like what's the net benefit? Yeah, if it's super positive, then sure, I'll do that. So like actually I had some friends who invited me to go climb Cayambe in a couple weeks and I said yes to that because it's like, you know what, that's gonna be really fun. It fits well into my schedule. It'll be a nice, chill, long effort up high. Like that sounds great. It wasn't exactly what I had planned, but it's going to be fun. And that's also really important. So I think it's about recognizing, putting things in that framing of, okay, what is the net here? Is it net positive? Is it net negative? And then the big like red flag that I'm looking for is this something that I'm doing that's coming from a place of ego or having to prove something to myself? Because if it is, then that's almost certainly getting greedy.
Yeah, very good. And I think you've said this a few times now, and it's a really important point that certainly hits home with me, which is, and certainly you see this in all high performing uh, people in any area. So, which is, it's not your good days, it's your bad days, it's your mediocre days, right?
Yep.
And I think it seems to me it's almost even more important in your sport, um, because you get so few chances, right?
Yep.
So a tennis player hits lots of shots every match, right?
Right.
And plays every week, right?
Yep.
Um, and I learned this early on. Again, this is sort of another Tim Galloway thing from way back when. The difference between, us hackers who can, get the ball around the court, or even a very beginner, and Novak Djokovic or Roger Federer or Rafael Nadal or Tiger Woods in golf, or a great writer, um, is their mediocre days are still really, really, really good. They just don't
Exactly.
really have their level, their average level. They just keep moving up their average level. This is
Yep.
People used to say this about Tiger Woods in particular, that he was just playing a different game. Because even on his average days, he was way better than everybody else. And on his
Right.
great days, he just blew everybody away. Um,
Yep.
and that's a really interesting and important point, is, because you said that many times, and I think that's very true. And I remember hearing an interview with a very famous author. I'm trying to remember which one it was. Very famous, super famous best-selling writer. And one of her pieces of advice, if you wanted to be a writer, was just write every day, because actually the
Yep.
differences between what you think are your worst writing days and your best writing days are not as big as you think. And and uh, and now again, to her, she was already at such a high level that that was probably true. Again, her average was so high that the difference between her best and her worst days just wasn't that significant. So really interesting. Okay, I see. We talked a little bit about balancing the decisions on a day-to-day basis. You also have different activities that also makes your life a little more complicated than I realized. So you've got physical therapy, massage, cross training, strength training, running, different kinds of running. How do you figure out how to incorporate all those elements, how much, when you put them in, and just putting a schedule together?
I think mostly it's so on structured days are a lot. It's like literally almost all day I'm exercising or recovering between sessions. So I try to stack a lot of things onto those days. So for example, like on Saturday when I did the Polichaski trail, it's like, okay, I'll get up at 4:30 in the morning. I'm on the mountain by 6. That's a few hours there is the workout on the mountain. I come back, I have breakfast, then I go to the gym. I do a second running session uphill on the treadmill there. That's a couple hours. Then I'm in the gym. Then I do my lift in the gym. That's an hour and a half probably. Stretching is another 30 minutes. Then I'm coming back, having another meal, maybe resting a little bit. I do a 45-minute session on the bike just to kind of spin down. And then my PT comes over and we do some physical therapy. She does some body work, some massage. So those days are super full. It's literally from like basically when I leave my house at 5:30 in the morning until 6:30 p.m. when the PT leaves. Like that's all day is basically something around training. And so I try to really load those days. And then my easier days, I'd say, are a little bit more flexible. So I'll have, this morning, for example, was an easy day. So I'd, head over to Polichaski. I'm there again for maybe 3 hours. I come back, I have lunch, then I do some work, relax in the afternoon. And then again, I'll do a short session on the bike, half an hour, and some cross training, some core, some stretching, things like that. So in general, I'd say normal days are like there's two main focuses. One will be in the morning and one is in the afternoon. And then those really big structured days, it is really like just an all day affair. And it's, again, it's just experience. It's just knowing how much I can comfortably fit in a day and having, again, set up my life in such a way that all of these puzzle pieces kind of fit together where I can make it work literally from a timing perspective, you know?
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. So a lot of it is, as you say, just experience, and it seems complicated to somebody like me, but in fact, because you're doing it so much, you sort of get used to, okay, I've got to get this many of this type of activity in, and
Yep.
here's how I can structure the week to do that. Okay,
Yep.
great. We talked a little bit about social activities because you mentioned you're going to climb Cayumbi with some friends. So how important is mixing that? Because you had a little bit of that this week where you had some social stuff and some hard training, especially towards the end. How important is that balance for you, keeping some level of social activity and social interaction in there?
I think it's
The
really
monk
important.
versus the
Yeah.
the partier.
I think yeah, yeah. I don't think the partier is here. It's definitely important for me to have some amount of social interaction. Basically, any day of the week, I have people that I can call if I really want human interaction and can say, "Hey, let's go for a run, let's go for a hike." And yeah, that's kind of how I can get some human interaction if I need it. And I'm definitely saying no to most of the kind of later night, like going out to, parties or dinners, like late dinners and things like that. But it's also, that's the price that I have accepted long ago is when I'm in this kind of heavy monk training mode, like you say, that's just kind of how it goes. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel good. I mean, I know that I can like do this and focus and do this for a few months. And going back to our conversation about delayed gratification, it's something that I think is one of my superpowers, maybe, that I am able to focus like that, and then also afterwards I can enjoy it and relax and kind of make up for lost time, and be a very hyper social person during that time. So yeah, a little bit of both.
Yeah. We certainly see that. And when you say go to bed early, you really mean it because, we'll just be sitting around the couch after dinner at like 7:30 or something, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm going to bed now. Bye.
Sometimes you gotta go to bed at 7:30.
Well, yeah,
You
if you're
got an
getting up
early
at
morning.
4:30.
If you got an
Yeah.
early morning,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. That's all the talking to dad questions that I have. Anything else you wanted to add before we move on to the cool down?
No, I think that's a good place to wrap it. It's been a really, really good week. I'm super excited with where I am and stoked to kind of get the real grind going here in Quito.
Yeah, I'm happy it's gone so well for you so far. So congrats once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, another cool down with my wonderful son, Tyler Andrews, who I'm not biased about at all, as his dad. So let's talk about why you're in Quito. You've been there for a long time now. You've mentioned in the past uh, the sessions that you've been there 17 years now, which even got my attention. I can't believe it. But
It's crazy.
anyway, how did you end up there? I still remember, of course, the first time you went to Quito, but what made you decide to go there that first time, and how did you decide to stay once you got there? What attracted you so much?
So after I graduated from high school, I took a year off before I went to college. And during that year, I was mostly living with my parents and working. My very first like real job was working at Wendy's that year. That was a good life experience, and part of that was saving some money for college, and also so I could spend a few months doing a volunteer abroad program. That was one of the things that I wanted to try and do was go to another country and get some independence and be in a new place by myself. And I was looking at a lot of different programs, and honestly, I ended up in Quito because of the altitude. Like it was literally that simple. I remember just looking at different placements. So it was like a big like agency that had programs all over the world, and I was just like typing in the names of random cities to Wikipedia. And I remember I like it was yesterday typing in Quito, and it was like, oh, Quito is the world's highest capital city, and I was like, well, I guess I'll go there. That sounds cool. It's like I had just gotten like really into running during my senior year of high school, and had been, reading everything I could and learning everything I could. And I knew that going to train at altitude was a thing that like really serious runners did. So I was like, I should probably go do that. That sounds cool. And so that was one of the things I was looking at for that year was, okay, can I go somewhere that's high up? And I didn't know anything. I couldn't even point it to Ecuador on a map at that point. And I was like, yep, okay, sold, let's go. And so that was it. And I don't know if you remember this, but at that point, I was thinking about being pre-med and going to medical school. And so I was working in a hospital during my time here in a children's hospital. And that was a really formative experience. This is an aside, and I'll keep it relatively brief. But long story short is I decided not to become a doctor after that experience. For a variety of reasons, I saw a lot of like systemic problems and like issues in the infrastructure that to me were bigger issues that could be solved versus just potentially being a physician. So that kind of like totally changed my life track as well as having this deep connection with South America and the Andes and all that. So it was a really, really important time for me. I think I was only here about 3 months, but it felt like a really long time. And it was the first time I'd ever been on a plane by myself, been out of the country by myself, you know, speak another language, all these things. And I really just totally fell in love with the place. The mountains, the people, the food, the smells, the language, like everything about it just was so new and exciting and different to me. And, and yeah, it was just tremendously powerful. And I remember coming back and like working at Wendy's. It was like kind of it was a little bit of a rough transition there. But I knew that after that first trip that I had made connections and that I wanted to go back.
Okay, cool. So yes, I do remember sort of vaguely that uh, you had gotten much more interested in running, and the altitude was a big deal. I didn't realize it was like, oh yeah, that works.
That was the deciding factor. This is me as like
Yeah.
an 18-year-old,
Well, it happens.
literally.
It definitely happens. I remember, I will tell you a little bit of an aside story, and we'll see if it makes the final session that, my friend and hero, Alan Kay, who invented a lot of computing, he was an undergrad at Colorado, University of Colorado, I think somewhere in Colorado. And he was, ridiculous prodigy, and he majored in like 12 things simultaneously. And he's looking where to go to grad school. And he decided, well, I did pretty well up at altitude, so I'm just going to look at programs that are at least 4,000 feet up.
Huh. Okay.
So he ended up at the University of Utah because
There you go.
it was over 4,000
Checks the
feet, and the
box. Yep.
rest, as they say, is history. We can talk more about that if people are interested, if you're interested later. But it
Yeah.
was, he's one of the smartest guys ever, and that's how he decided. So these things happen on simple
Yeah.
metrics like that.
Sometimes, yeah,
Um,
you're like a lot of these most important life decisions are just like so random. You think that you
yeah,
have your whole plan, and then you look
yeah,
back and the most important things in your life are just like, you know,
yeah.
total
And
roll of
I don't
dice.
remember that much you're wanting to be pre-med because you were so interested in music and things like that. Um, my big memory is, well, beyond, we went there to visit you, and that was
Yeah.
fun. And it was a special place, and the house you were living in, Maria, that
Yeah,
was
she's such a
great.
sweet lady.
And uh, but I remember when you called me up and said, I'm reading this math book or physics book or something. I'm like, what? You're on this sort of semi-vacation and you're reading a physics book. So that was cute. We can talk about
That's
that
cute.
another time. But
Yeah. From Quito, then I went to freshman year of college, and then I got connected with this company called Strive that a friend of mine on the cross country team at Tufts was involved with. And long story short, then I ended up going back down to South America every summer because I got hired to lead trips in Peru for high school and college kids to come down and basically run and do some volunteer work in the Sacred Valley of Peru. So I think I spent 10 summers in a row down there, and that Peru is right next to Ecuador, and I would often kind of come back through Quito. And so over those 10 years of being both a college student and young adult after college, just kind of got deeper and deeper roots planted into the Andes. And eventually it got to the point where I when well hang on a sec. Actually, now that I think about it, there was almost an entire year. So right after I graduated from college, I moved back here to Quito.
Right. Right.
So that's actually a really important step that I should note in this time of working at Strive in the summers. So I graduated from college in 2013 and pretty much immediately moved down here to Ecuador. And this is my this is like one of my other funny kind of like interview talking points is people will be like, oh, how did you get started in pro running? And it's like, well, basically, I graduated from college with an engineering degree. And I told myself, okay, I'm going to give myself like 6 months, maybe a year to go down to Ecuador and train because I know I could live really cheap down there. I could like live off my savings or get a crappy job. And I'll just train really hard at altitude and do some longer races and see how it goes. And that'll be my 6 to 12 month like second gap year, I guess. And then I'll go work for Boeing or something. and um, and so I came down here. I literally got a job cleaning toilets and making beds at a hostel in La Marine, which is
Yep.
like kind of the hood right next to Old Town, like eh, down here in Quito. And it was a great experience. I mean, I was like 22. I was having so much fun and training super hard, met a bunch of people to run with. And I ran a half marathon that fall that went super well. And then that got me into Boston. They let me in as like a kind of sub elite, like local guy, basically. And so that was my first marathon was
The
Boston in
Boston Marathon.
2014. Yeah,
Hmm.
Boston Marathon in 2014. And that went really well. I ran, I think, 2:21, I want to say, in my first marathon. And that got the attention of Vermont City. And then I went to Vermont City like 5 weeks later. I won that race. I ran 2:20. And then I qualified for the Olympic trials in the fall. So it was like all of a sudden my gap year was extended because I had like these goals that seemed really far out that all of a sudden were kind of right there. And I'd also, I think it was before, yeah, it was before I qualified for the Olympic trials, after I won Vermont City, I started talking with Hoka and got signed by them. And so all of a sudden, I'm a year out of college and I'm thinking, originally I was thinking, okay, this is going to be the end of my gap year. Now it's like, oh, I have this very small, but still it is a legitimate contract from a shoe company. That's pretty cool. So I guess I should kind of see how that goes. And then there's this long process of like, every year it just kind of got a little bit more realistic and obviously there's ups and downs and stuff but now my joke is like I'm on my whatever 12th gap year at this point or something and I'm still waiting to start my real life um, but the point being that year in Ecuador was really really important for me because if I hadn't known that this was a place that I could come and just train really hard at altitude live really cheap kind of be that like dirtbag runner and develop myself like I don't think I would be where I am today because if I'd stayed in the States, I just don't think that would have been an option. Um, so that was probably one of the most important things about Ecuador for me was that time. And then since then, like I said, I was coming to Peru every single summer. I was coming back to Quito quite a bit as well with that. I think I had another like 6 or 9 month stay here, or maybe around like 2018 or 19 when my then partner was kind of between jobs. And then after COVID, I was out of a long-term relationship and kind of like felt like I could go anywhere in the world. And I was like, where do I want to go? Where it feels like home? And it was here in Quito. So yeah, I think it's been a long journey and just recognizing that this is a place that has really started to feel like home for me. Coming here feels like coming home, and a big part of that is just the community of people that I built here, runners, friends, locals, expats, like everybody, and just yeah, it feels like home now, and that's really special.
Nice. And more so than Peru, because you did spend a lot of time in Peru.
Yeah,
So what made Quito end up being the place that felt like home?
Peru, Peru, I love. I think Peru is different because I was always working there. I was always leading trips. So it just it has like a different association in my mind. It never really felt the same sense of like home. It always felt like a very special place that I love, and I still go back there pretty regularly. But it never felt like, oh, this is like me just settling down and being myself and having my own space, like we were talking about, and having a home. It was always I was there guiding other people around and dealing with crises of teenagers and stuff. So it's like it's a little bit of a different like association in my mind.
Okay.
And also I think Quito is just, I mean, it's an extremely different place where I live. Like Quito is a city with 2 million people, and Pisac, the town I worked in Peru, was had like I don't know 2,000 people. So it's a tremendously different vibe. And to me, Quito is has a lot of the things that I look for in a home base. It has, the kind of modern comforts that I would want. I can drink the tap water. That's huge here in South America. Things as simple as that. And yet I also have like amazing nature out my back door and mountains right here. And it's at altitude and the weather is kind of eternal spring because it's on the equator. So there's all these little things that are important to me as a person and a runner that Quito really checks those boxes. And yeah, I've lived in a lot of places over the years, and I think this is it's a special one.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. It's really interesting. And I learned some things even though I've known you your whole life. So
Yeah.
thanks. Anything else you want to add?
No, I love it. If anybody's ever thinking about coming down to Ecuador, I think it's a tremendously underrated destination, especially for trail running, hiking, all these things. There's incredible nature. It's a very small country, so you can get around and see a ton of stuff really quickly. And it's quite close to the United States, by the way. It's 4 hour flight to Miami. That's another thing that's super convenient. So
Yeah.
it's easy to
Yeah,
get back
yeah.
and forth.
Very cool city. We visited there a few times and always had a great time.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a very cool country, as you
Yeah.
said. And of course the Galapagos is part of
It
Ecuador. So if you
is.
go
A lot
that
of people
far,
don't
you're
know
not that
that.
far
Yeah.
from the Galapagos.
Galapagos
And the
Islands are part of
Galapagos are
Ecuador.
unbelievable. Yep.
Yep. Check it out
Great.
if you're here.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, yeah, feel free. If anybody is listening and has questions about Quito or Ecuador, feel free to hit me up. I'm always happy to talk, share advice, all that good stuff. But yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. Anything else you want to ask or add, Mr. C?
No, no, I think you're right. That's a good place to end it. So let's do it.
Excellent. Cool. All right. Well, I will read us out. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please, as always, send any feedback, questions, concerns, comments, hopes, dreams. You can send those to my email, ty@chosky.run, or DM me, Tyler C. Andrews, on Instagram. And remember, you can also read my raw training logs. Those are a lot more technical and have some more details. If you're kind of the running nerd and want to go poke your head in there, you can read that on my blog at tylercandrews.com and get that delivered to your inbox via Substack at tylercandrews.substack.com. Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week. Ciao.
Bye bye.